Thank you. As you can see, I'm somewhat vertically challenged. So if I think the microphone's working, but if you're having trouble hearing me, please feel free to put your hand up. Put your hands up. In that sense. My name is Leela Viswanathan, and I think to make things clearer, my last name, those of you who are hooked on phonics as a kid, if you break up my last name, it's Viswanathan. So it can be intimidating when you see my last name right away, but I want you to go over that barrier of fear and take a risk. I think we're all risk takers here. I'm so glad to see so many of you have stuck around for the afternoon. It's always difficult to do a presentation once the cake has been digested and everyone's ready for a bit of nap time. But it's really my pleasure here today to introduce to you the research that my associate, Lindsay Gradine, who's a graduate student in the Masters of Urban and Regional Planning and will be graduating and in the labor market very soon, I should say. She and I have been working together quite closely in terms of the design and the implementation of this research. We're halfway through the project, and so it's fun to begin to share with you some of the information that we've begun to collect. And we're thrilled to be contributing to a collaborative effort in terms of partnership building and problem solving around the revitalization of rural economies. Now, prior to entering academia, I worked in the not-for-profit sector and had a stint also in the Ontario Public Service, where I worked with policymakers, politicians as well, business peoples, and folks in the, I would say, advocacy sector, all working together to try to find ways and to develop solutions to help some of the most marginalized individuals in our populations to contribute in a variety of different ways in society. So this project comes naturally to me, and it's also personal in the sense that my parents had immigrated to Canada in the 1960s from India. And the world is a different place now in many ways, but some of the concerns and the efforts and the feelings of wanting to do the right thing to help people on their way and give them the opportunity to find work, that hasn't changed since the 60s. From what my parents have told me, this is very much similar to what we're experiencing today. And so at the heart of this research is the belief that work and quality of life are some of the main reasons why people come to Canada, move to Ontario, and live in our communities. And I want us to keep that in mind. Sorry about the text, folks, but we'll see in terms of the contrast here. I hope you can read this. But if you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, then we're off to a really good start because we're making 4 stops along the way in this path of this presentation. And the first stop is to have us all start at the same point, which is, what do we mean when we're saying, what does it mean to integrate immigrants in the labor market? And human resource professionals have been using this word new talent. So I'm putting that up there as a word for you to think about in terms of integrating immigrants into the labor market. The next stop along the way will be to give you a sense of the context, the geographic context, the demographic context, and the research design for this project. It's a qualitative research study, which if you think alongside Kevin Stollerick's presentation today with the quantitative side, together I'm hoping you'll get a better sense, at least at the end of this project, a qualitative and quantitative sense of immigration in relation to labor market development in the region. We'll also cover some preliminary findings, and then finally, I really want to tell you what's going to come next so that you may have the opportunity to invite me to share the final findings that come out of this project. So early on in the process of doing this research, we conducted some interviews. And even before getting into the research methodology, I wanted to give you a definition or a starting point for thinking about immigration and immigrant integration in the labor market. So one of our project participants early on, as I said in the project, told us, and I've used the exact same words that were given to me, and I've put in a few words of my own, but They're pretty much the same. For me, this person said, it means integration of immigrants means a person who is a new Canadian or is an immigrant who moves to our town and knows that the support is here, that's going to keep them settled here in their own personal lives, will help them develop a network of employers and opportunities to work, and with some actual opportunities to get interviews. So not just the jobs, knowing that the jobs are there and that the support is there, but getting them from that starting point even to get interviews, to meet with employers face-to-face. This description also reminded me that this research needs to stay practical. We need to make sure that the information that we're collecting is going to be useful. And so as we do the research, we're trying to connect people with one another. That we really take the partnership and the networking of this project to heart and connect people together along the way. One of the points that Dr. Chan mentioned early on in the day is that we work on different timelines. Academics have this clear process that they need to take, and people need solutions now. So one of the approaches we've been taking is to connect people along the way. We also realized that we wanted to cast a wide enough net to collect information that gathers insight from a variety of different people experiencing this issue from their standpoint. And we wanted to focus on the landscape of supports and services that are available, and we wanted to figure out and learn about solutions. So how are different people working on retaining and attracting immigrants as new talent to Eastern Ontario? So I'm cross-appointed to the Faculty of Geography too, so I need to have a map in there. And the context for this project is Eastern Ontario, but we're a two-person team, Lindsay Gradine and I. Lindsay's sitting in the corner there with a number of our students from the School of Urban and Regional Planning. And we realized that it's important to take a regional focus. And one of the reasons is that, well, labor market information is not categorized in urban and rural, right? And we know that immigrants move from urban to rural areas, but sometimes back again. So I wanted to get a sense of the region as a whole. But we also knew that Eastern Ontario was far too big for a two-person, highly skilled research team to tackle in a short period of time. So what we decided to do is to look at some comparisons. And the best ones that really stood out for us, and because of the proximity of these two cities, is we wanted to look at Kingston and its region, as well as Peterborough and its region. So when you think of Kingston, we have to remember the Thousand Islands, South Frontenac, Leeds and Grenville, Loyalist Township, within the County of Addington, and of course, Kingston and the Frontenac Islands. And there's Peterborough. Peterborough and the Kawartha Lakes region. We've got Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, Haliburton, and Peterborough. Two regions not that far from one another that have some similarities when it comes to demographics, as well as specifically looking at the pool of individuals who are eligible to work in the labor force. If you look at the 2006 numbers in terms of the population, the numbers are quite similar. Both cities also have neighboring townships and counties that have either what we would consider a stabilized population or a decreasing population. We know from a governance perspective that both cities have gained and promoted their commitment to partnerships and local immigration partnerships in particular. Both cities and regions also have centralized settlement service delivery systems. And all these factors allow for some comparability. Some of the factors that aren't on this chart is the fact that the majority of businesses in both these regions have 0 to 2 employees, which means they are employer-owned and operated. The next level of businesses is up between 2 and 9 employees. But both cities also have large organizations and institutions that have 100+ employees. So we can tap into the experiences and expertise of human resource professionals who are located in these larger organizations, as well as talk to employers one-to-one. There's a lot of research out there that has talked about and continues to talk about barriers that immigrants are facing in trying to gain access to employment. There's also a fair bit of information out there in terms of the services and supports present to assist newcomers, new talent seeking employment. And so we wanted to shift the way in which we do our research and to think carefully about the opportunities as well. We're not ignoring the barriers, and many of the individuals we talk to, when we talk about opportunities and ask about opportunities, they'll start the conversation by talking about barriers. So we're not avoiding barriers, but we wanted to be clear from the onset that we're interested in solutions. And we want to look at what efforts are in place to use information and resources currently available, labor market information that's currently available. We also wanted to gain a better understanding of the kinds of supports in place for employers, as well as new talent, to gain access to employment. So what does this mean? It means that we're not asking a lot of why questions. Why questions would keep us steeped in the theory of all sorts of different things, which we have ready access to. By asking those what questions, by getting a sense of the description of the landscape, the challenges and the opportunities facing employers, and the challenges and opportunities facing our region in general, we're hoping to get a lay of the land, a starting point, pieces of information that we can all benefit from. But we're also interested, as I said, in solutions. So how questions are important to ask. How do individuals use the labor market information out there? How is it used and how is it applied? How are employers and job developers being those individuals who connect the employers with potential employees, how do they find new talent? How do they work at attracting immigrants? And how are some employers fostering a diverse workplace environment? There are now new initiatives within the Eastern Ontario region to assist employers to think about and find ways in which they can foster more diverse workplace environments. So we didn't want to avoid that question as well. And all of this would be to illustrate both the landscape but also some of the solutions in terms of what it would take to integrate immigrants into our labor market. So as I've noted earlier on, we're taking a qualitative research design. We're not averse to numbers, but we want to figure out some of the meaning associated with what it means to attract and retain newcomers to our neighborhoods and our towns. We're only halfway through our research, and we've begun to analyze regional and local documents and reports. And in addition to reviewing some of the literature, we're looking at some of the gaps of information that may exist. And in order to fill those gaps, face-to-face interviews are fairly important. Now, for the research geeks out there, what we do is we're using a purposive sampling of interviews. And what that means is we start talking to people who are interested in this topic. They're not afraid to talk about some of the difficulties in meeting this challenge of integrating immigrants into the workforce. And in order to make that matter, we've also used a combination of snowball sampling. So in talking to individuals, they connect us with other individuals who may be interested, may be knowledgeable, may not be knowledgeable about the issue, but really want to talk about some of the possibilities of addressing this problem. And it also means that we as researchers need to be flexible and be willing to be opportunistic. That is, when we have a hunch, we're trying to follow it and figure out how to draw those connections where connections have not been made. And so all of this is to mitigate our own researcher bias, but to get enough information to really lay out the landscape, as I said. There's also very little in the literature about what employers think. What do human resource professionals think? And so we need to dig that information up. There's also a lot of information that's gathered on the provincial scale and the federal scale. We want to focus on the local and regional scale. and highlight what employers are facing, as well as I said, in the few larger companies in the region, what human resource professionals are gathering and learning. One of the things I've also learned is that some companies no longer use the term human resource professional. They use the term talent management consultants. So connecting and building networks, and also learning how people are talking about these issues. I can't impress upon you that it's a scary point for some individuals to talk about immigration. It means highlighting difference in a society where we promote multiculturalism and equity, and there's a fear in terms of talking about some of the challenges of what that means to promote a diverse workplace. And so by meeting with individuals one-to-one and having open discussions, I think even through the process of research, people are becoming more enlightened and more aware that they're not the only ones tackling these issues. So the reason why you're all here, I'm sure, is that you want to hear some of these preliminary findings. And I know you've done a lot of reading today, so I'm going to keep the next slide really simple. Our findings fall into 3 categories so far. So that does not mean there won't be other categories of information. I'm just trying to share with you some of the most meaningful ones that we've collected so far. And the 3 categories are labor market information, supports, and employers. When it comes to labor market information, what we found and what you may already know is that our workforce development boards are doing a great job in collecting regional information. Some of the research studies as well gather information from Census Canada, some of the best information that's available. What we're also finding is that employers don't necessarily know how to use that information. Employers in the region are focusing on what they need now, not necessarily what they need 5 years from now. And so when we're talking about the need to be competitive and the need to be aware 5 years from now, the messages aren't necessarily getting across in terms of how to prepare for that, how to prepare for 5 to 10 years from now. The immediacy is usually in what do I need now and what do I need to meet my needs over the next season, if it's a seasonal employer. So the use of labor market information in different kinds of businesses varies. And what I'd like to find out is how individuals are using this information and potentially making some recommendations to make that a lot easier, so that as a planner, as an urban regional planner, I think in terms of systems, but I also think in terms of the individual experience. So how can we make that connection with all this system information and making it useful in the actual operation and planning of a business? And this is where partnering with the business school is fantastic, because this is where they're the experts when it comes to business plans, and I deal with master plans of cities. So working with business plans and linking that to larger systemic issues is an important piece of information. We're going to dig a little bit more deeply and gather more information to share with you. The second point, too, is that job developers are knocking on employers' doors. The information that they have from in terms of regional labor market information is, in their view, it's great for looking into the future and also the past, but if we're going to deal with what employers need now and what the current pool of talent need now, they need to knock on doors. So the job developers I've been talking to are literally spending a lot of time hitting the pavement, knocking on doors, making those phone calls, and insisting that employers call them back so that they get the information that they need. The next point I want to bring up is supports. Now, you may think in terms of social support, peer support, those types of supports. What's coming through in the interviews and what we've read so far is that there's been a shift in terms of provincial and federal funding, whereby the federal government is now emphasizing a fair bit of their efforts on supporting employers. What supports do employers need? And that means some of our regional offices who are collecting regional information are also being asked to shift some of their priorities. So our landscape, as I said, is a shifting one. The emphasis on employers as well in terms of what kinds of supports they need means that Our local immigration partnerships are linking settlement support providers, job developers, and employers together. They're also linking this network with the city, who I'm sure a number of cities already, and some of this has been mentioned already today, is that they've established web portals providing information for newcomers before they even arrive to Canada. So how can we connect what information employers want sent out to the universe, to the globe, and have the city involved as well? The municipality there's greater expectation on the municipality to take more of a role on immigration as well. What we've also been finding out is that employers need specialized information. What kind of information? In part, they need support to navigate the ever-changing immigration system. Sometimes that may even mean working with the Workforce Development Board to help them figure out how to fill out the temporary worker visa forms, for example, or to make them aware of new programs. And I don't know how many of you know, but on April 1st, the federal government launched a new program for startups, trying to attract immigrants to invest their time and money and set up startups, not Starbucks, perhaps a Starbucks, but startups, where they'll come to this country specifically to start up new businesses. So clearly there's an emphasis on immigration policy around economics and entrepreneurship. It's a 5-year pilot project, and there are apparently federally approved angel investors and venture capitalists who will be tapped in and linked to newcomers who are interested in starting up new businesses. Now, this is an advantage for rural areas as well, who have told us at the Montigny Centre that entrepreneurship is a key factor that they're looking at in terms of attracting new immigrants. There's also, from the employer standpoint, and employers keep coming up, that immigration partnerships are something that they're really tapping into. However, they need assistance to facilitate the short-term need to address their immediate needs, but also in terms of thinking about the long term. How do they make the connection between where they need to be 5 years from now and what they need now? How can you do that when you're a company of 0 employees, so you're running the show yourself, and you don't have a human resources department to help you with all of that? So we're hoping to be able to specifically outline what kinds of supports employers need, and to try to find those individuals and organizations already in place to facilitate that process. Keys, a key organization here in Kingston, has also developed a new program called Hire Smart, where they are going to work with employers across Eastern Ontario particularly to assist them to develop a more diverse workplace. So there are initiatives at the community level, what I would call the local level, but also at the federal level. And what I think this research can do is to try to connect the dots between these kinds of efforts. Employers don't seem to differentiate new talent in terms of immigrants versus new talent in general. And that's a good thing in certain ways, but it's also a not so great thing in that we know that they need support specifically in terms of integrating new immigrants. So if their perception is that they can't differentiate, how do they differentiate in a manner that is supportive both of new talent and also the employer? And this is where, I have to put my thinking cap on to help them with that. It's not something that we can solve right away, but it's certainly a component, I think, in terms of human resources, as well as in terms of employment equity we can think about. And finally, I want to mention partnerships and a way of connecting. I indicated to you earlier on that, academics and folks working on the ground, we tend to work on different timelines. So it's been vital to me to take the time that I have over the 2 years or 1.5 years that this project has been not unraveling in a bad way, but unraveling in a really good way, to identify who can connect with whom, to provide assistance along the way, while I go back into my research office and connect the dots in that manner. I like to see people actually connect out there and help with problem solving. So when we have an ever-changing landscape with changes in immigration policy, changes in funding, what comes next is, given this iterative research project, we do have to go with the flow. And we do have to think carefully in terms of how cuts to supports and services and programs over the past year that we've been doing, well, 6 months to a year that we've been thinking about and conducting this research, how that's going to affect the recommendations that we come up with. We need to ensure that at the end of this project, the recommendations we come up with stick. So if it's based on a landscape that was at the beginning of this project, it's not going to matter. So we need to ensure that we're with it, right? That we're with this shifting environment, and we understand the kinds of roles involved. This is a dynamic environment for immigration policy. You thought labor market policy was complicated, immigration policy is complicated as well. And I give a lot of credit to the community partners who keep me apprised of changes that come along the way so that I can ensure that this project continues to matter in the long term. So aside from collecting more information, we will be analyzing our findings and discussing them in relation to answering our key questions, ensuring there's that connection. We want a plain language report to come out as we, as academics, are putting together our academic articles as well. And the Moneson Center will play a really important role in helping us distribute that plain language report so that all of you can make use of it. I can't impress upon you how much events like this and projects like this help us build stronger connections. And, you know, the last word that I have is really from one of our interviewees who felt that, you know, as much as there may be supports for new immigrants to connect to the community, and that's important, if they don't or are not able to get into the labor market, then the rest of the integration part is not sustainable. And I would say that also for our rural economies. Sustainability and finding new ways to inject a life into our economies through immigration is something that I'm really passionate about, and I hope to hear more from you as well in sharing that passion. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Lynn de Montigny.
So good afternoon to all. My name is Lynn de Montigny, and I work for RDÉE Ontario. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Viswanathan and Lindsay Graden for their great work.
So why don't we just keep it on that screen?
It's okay. So I can begin. So what is RDÉE Ontario? RDÉE Ontario, it's a French acronym for a provincial network for economic development and employability for French communities in a minority situation. RDÉE has teams all around Ontario who work with different programs and services. The central program I am part of is assisting existing and startup businesses, supporting industry and economic sectors, ensuring employability, and reinforcing community resources. We also have RDÉE Ontario Affaires et Alliances, whose mission is regrouping the economic strength for the benefit of small and medium enterprise, competitiveness of Ontario. La Bonne Affaire is another program offered by RDÉE for SMEs identifying, attracting, and retaining talents in their area of business. For newcomers, finding relevant employment. So we stay in the subject. For immigrant entrepreneurs, developing essential business tools. RDÉE Ontario is also a member of the great national network of RDÉE Canada. So I will continue. As a partner and as a development officer, I was asked to comment on the research conducted by Dr. Viswanathan. As a partner and a member of the leadership team and researcher partnership, I had the opportunity to read the research subject and thus be able to identify where I could make a contribution. When I heard about Dr. Viswanathan's subject, integrating immigrants into the Eastern Ontario labor market, it was logical for me to choose this research because of the link to my work. So I offered to introduce her to the key players who can feed her research topic. As a development officer, part of my work, past and present, has been to work with workforce members, local immigration partnerships, and employment services. Over the years, it gave me the opportunity to understand their needs and services. Therefore, I was able to identify sources who can provide relevant information for the research. So, researcher and practitioner, it was supposed to be a slide. So, because I am a great believer in theory versus practice, I was present at several meetings between practitioners and researchers and particularly appreciate their expertise. With this new information, and thanks to Ms. Viswanathan, the research is giving new direction to the work in progress and its practicality. Excuse my English. I personally appreciate her willingness to implement change to research during and collaborative work. As a development officer, I greatly appreciate the accessibility to effect the result of research conducted in the field of economic development, primarily for my personal knowledge, but also to share with my colleagues, clients, organizations, and entrepreneurs. The data found in search research can help guide action to optimize results, can lead to new business ideas in areas of need, provide the necessary credibility in funding requests, provide also information for market research and business planning, and also lead to adjustment in some strategic planning. I know very few organizations, small and medium enterprise, who have the HR resources or the skills to conduct and interpret search research. So finally, it was another slide, finally, the next step. I want to conclude that I am looking forward to reading the final report and sharing the result also. I want to take the opportunity to thank all researchers for their great work and for the ingenuity and generosity of the Montigny Center for providing access to the research. Thank you for your attention and see you on our next adventure. I will be pleased to answer questions.
Our apologies, Lynn, for
okay.
the technical glitch. All the slides from today will be available on our website following the conference.
He's got them now.
Her slides are ready now, so we can put them up on the break maybe.
No, it's okay. It was just the title.
Anyways, we do welcome questions for Leela and Lynn as well. Any questions? Right here.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour la présentation. C'est apprécié. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to ask, in your research, Doctor, did you interview some French immigrants? And if yes, are there any differences with more Anglophone immigrants?
That's a great question. And oui, certainement, j'ai entrevué quelques service providers. OK. Les entrevues ne sont pas complètes. On va continuer cet été et ce printemps. So the interviews aren't over, and it's a great question because some of the initial findings are such. What we're finding is that when it comes to Francophone immigrants from Quebec, and from outside of Canada, their experiences of integrating into the labor market may be different in some ways in terms of the cultural competencies associated with entering a labor market that is foreign from your own in terms of another country. But the side of language, I think, is important for all of us to reflect upon. Individuals who are bilingual, who speak English and French, but want to seek employment in the francophone sector, that is, jobs that take French speakers, it's very difficult for them to get those jobs. And job postings for all you employers out there, if you're looking for a francophone employee, it's really important to put your ads out in French as well. So if it's a bilingual position, to put them out in French and English. As well, and this is the sad part in my view, is that individuals who speak French and English but would like to seek employment in French, given our bilingual status as a city in Kingston, will promote themselves as English speakers in order to get access to a larger pool of jobs. And so that differentiation, that experience in terms of individuals, say, from the Congo who are French-speaking and individuals from Quebec who are French-speaking, it's quite similar when it comes to the language side of things and seeking employment. So that's one of the key findings that I have, but I'm expecting to find more.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for back here? Bob.
Doctor, as an educator, I'm very intrigued by what you were saying there from the perspective of employment and employers and communities. What about similar type research from integrating the students from new immigrants into the colleges and the providing that culture, that community? Is there any research like that that's out there that you're aware of?
The folks at St. Lawrence College, if we're going to talk about this region, have done some great work. If you give me your business card, I will connect you with someone who would be able to answer some specific questions on that realm. At Queen's University, we have our international center where international students become integrated, I would say, in campus life. The struggle that our economic development offices, our chambers of commerce, and even the university have encountered, and Dr. Chan has been involved in this research, is how do we keep these young people here after they've completed their education? And so the integration, their primary location of integration initially is their campus, their college campus, university campus, their high school. But then beyond that is how do we continue to involve them here? I know your question from the lunchtime session was looking for reading in terms of integration. I'm a big believer, and my students in this corner here will attest to it, in asset-based development, asset-based community development. And it's a term that a lot of business folks use, but as community developers we use as well. And there are two gentlemen, John Kretzman and I think they're both named John. Is it John Kretzman and John McKnight, who have written a book called Abundant Communities, and who actually have step-by-step explanations on how to identify assets in your community, recognizing that it's not necessarily your government funders. It will be your churches, your community groups, your schools, your knitting groups, your quilt groups, all of these individuals who really make it meaningful for people to belong. And to use that as a community development tool for neighborhood planning as well as city planning is something that I can attest as really important. And